Let's see what the stew has for us today. Welcome to the Gnomecast, the Gnome Stew's tabletop gaming advice podcast. Here we talk with the other gnomes about gaming things to avoid becoming part of the stew, so I guess we'd better be good. I'm your friendly review gnome, Jared Rasher, and today we've got a special Gnomecast for you. We'll be talking to Celeste Conowitch. Would you like to introduce yourself and let people know where they know you from?
Yeah, hey everybody, my name is Celeste Conowitch. I am a full-time TTRPG designer based out of Seattle. You might have seen my work before on some Dungeons & Dragons products. Specifically, I was one of the writers on Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden from Wizards of the Coast. I also do a ton of freelance work with Kobold Press, MCDM Productions, and I am a full-time game designer with 2C Gaming, which is an awesome third-party D&D publisher. So that's just a few things. You might also know me from Venture Maidens, which is an actual play D&D 5th edition podcast that I've been the GM and producer for over 5 years now. I'm also a streamer. I co-own a network called Penwitch Studio with Lisa Penrose. So just a few things, I guess.
All right. I know, part of why I want to do this interview is because I look at a lot of third-party D&D material, and I saw your name just increasingly show up in places like that, and then seeing your name in Rime of the Frost Maiden, I really wanted to get a chance to talk to you, and I'm really glad that you're on the show.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? I always love talking D&D. It's obviously one of my favorite things, so always happy to chat.
So the first time I did hear your name was when I first ran into the Venture Maidens podcast. Would you like to go into how that podcast started?
Yeah, so Venture Maidens has been around for quite a while now. I remember we started it because D&D 5th edition had just come out. And at that point, I had been, running a 3.5 campaign with my friends for, 4 years at that point. And a bunch of my friends were starting, the way adult life works, you all start getting jobs and moving away from each other. And, I had heard Drunks and Dragons, which was a very cool actual play podcast that was functioning at the time. And that was right when the Adventure Zone was getting started. And I was thinking, wow, people really want to hear other people play D&D. That's amazing. You know what? I think my friends and I have a really great game. And you know what? It would also be really nice to hear more femme voices doing these types of games and making these types of shows. So with that, I made the decision to go all in. I was like, yep, let's figure out how to stream, how to podcast. Let's figure out how to do this completely virtually. Go. And luckily, I had the rest of the Venture Maidens support me and say yes. And that was the beginning. And so now, 5 years later, we're still here making this show. We just started our campaign 2 after that first campaign wrapped up after all of that time. We're making a world book, the Venture Maidens campaign guide, a setting guide.
I may have backed that.
Yeah. Oh my God, thank you. Yeah, so that's sort of the short version to a very long tale.
Is there anything that you wanted to share about season 2, or not season 2, campaign 2 of Venture Maidens?
Yeah, well, what's really, really exciting is that we, Venture Maidens teamed up with 2C Gaming, who I'm now an employee of 2C Gaming, to make the Venture Maidens campaign guide. And so right now that, luckily, very successfully funded. So we are currently writing campaign, the campaign guide. And what's so fun is that as I'm writing this and we're playing through campaign 2, a lot of the elements that I'm creating, right now that are going in the book, are appearing in the game. We are using all of the character options that we are making. And so it's like the ultimate play test, right? Where we're actually
in front of everyone.
Right in front of everyone. We're just doing it live. So that kind of interchange, that feedback that is happening is incredible. And world building and book writing on a pretty epic scale. So if you do check out campaign 2, you're actually seeing what is going to be in the book and seeing it in action.
So you also have a zine that is part of your Patreon. What kind of material is in the zine?
Yeah, so we do little fanzines for our patrons. So that's twice a year. We put together a collection of just I mean, basically a ton of fun stuff you might want to see if you're a fan of Venture Maidens. So a bunch of art. We do little like character quizzes. We have, fan fictions that we write about our characters in the world. We have games, recipes, puzzles, all kinds of fun stuff that's just, it's like a highlights magazine for adults. It's sort of what we do with these. So there are just always these really fun, super creative zines and especially we love when we get to incorporate fan art and also show those off in the zines. So
Mm-hmm.
they're really just, a total love letter to our patrons and the people who make Venture Maidens possible.
Well, I was going to ask you about the campaign setting in the Kickstarter. We kind of touched on that a little bit, but is there anything else you'd like to share about what's coming up in that campaign guide?
Yeah, I mean, so the challenge, right, of a campaign guide for a podcast is that, we want people to be able to use this guide even if they've never heard of Venture Maidens. So the number one priority with this book has been making a tool that is useful for any dungeon master or any player to approach and find something awesome to incorporate in their world, find mechanics that are inspiring, that are awesome to use, something you really want to see at your table. I think the thing that I'm most excited about is this heroic destiny concept that we've developed for the book, which essentially it's a way for DMs and players to work with each other to develop like the larger narrative for their character. So these are things like, you might pick the Avenger heroic destiny, and maybe you start off, swearing vengeance against some enemy that has wronged you, but you become this amazing, like, Batman-esque figure, by the end of a campaign, or, symbiosis, where you form a relationship with a type of beast and that becomes a lifelong friendship. So it's these mechanics that allow you to cultivate like these personal stories within the larger narrative.
I know that was definitely one of the things that I saw in there that I really want to get a closer look at as
Yeah.
things develop. So
Yeah. I am so thrilled about it, and that's something that's so special because that's something we did in the Venture Maidens campaign 1. It was all character focused
Mhm.
story arcs. So I was like, man, how can we bring this thing about Venture Maidens to everyone? So I'm stoked for you to check it out.
So, did you always have in mind that the campaign was in your own world, or is that something that kind of developed as it moved forward?
Yeah, so we definitely we started homebrew in the homebrew world. We knew we were always going to be there. What's sort of interesting about it is this world has been with me for quite some time because I actually ran a 3.5 campaign set in the same world, just sort of on the other side of the mountain range that we've
Mhm.
been playing in now. So this world has been brewing and developing for such a long time. And I mean, what's really exciting too is when you have a live audience that's so invested and involved in your story, the world absolutely changes and morphs and becomes better as people engage with it. So the world has always been there, but it's this constantly changing, ever, breathing beast.
So, I was just going to share this as I was thinking about episodes and things that I've listened to and everything. I don't know why this is, but one of the things that has always stuck with me was remembering the red dragon chase with the gift that
Yeah.
when you ran that. For some reason, that always sticks with me, and I think part of that's because I don't think I'd ever heard anyone try to use the
chase
the
mechanics
chase mechanics
before, right?
on a podcast
Well,
before.
they're just like hidden inside the section in the DMG, and you're like, okay. So of course I had to go and find the weirdest thing to do because that's just how my brain works. So yes, hopefully we're the only podcast out there that ever has done chase mechanics. I guess it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare to see it for sure.
Oh, so I was going to also ask you about your current podcast network is Penwitch Studio, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
How did this come about? Because I know when I first started listening to you, that wasn't necessarily the home of the podcast. So,
Yeah. So when Venture Maidens started pretty quickly after, we linked up with Don't Split the Podcast Network, which was a network owned by James Introcaso and Rudy Basso, who are awesome folks, still very good friends of mine. And recently, in the last year, basically, they both got so busy with what they were doing. I mean, James moved to MCDM
Yeah.
Productions as their full-time like editor. So a lot was going on. So unfortunately, Don't Split the Podcast Network dissolved. And
It split.
so yeah, it's the way of the world. Like, we're all so busy.
Yeah.
Uh, so with that in mind, I mean, something I've always wanted to do is to create my own podcast network, especially a place for femme-owned and led shows to really just get the support they need to make it in this industry, because everything is so so male dominated. I don't know if you've noticed.
Just a little, yeah.
Just a bit. So really, that was always a vision I had and something I really wanted to do. And another of the shows that was on Don't Split the Podcast Network, Behold Her, which is made by the wonderful Lisa Penrose. Lisa and I are really good friends. We were actually roommates when we first moved to Seattle, and we still, have that great friendship. So we decided to join forces and make our dream a reality and create Penwitch Studio.
I was lucky enough to get to meet Lisa once at GameholeCon
Lisa
2
is
years
just
ago, I
so
think.
amazing. Yeah. Such an innovative creator and such like a positive voice of change. So working with her is an absolute joy, and it was really just a natural step to form this network.
It's really interesting when you're talking about James getting that job. I remember like there was this rapid fire, like a bunch of designers that I've been following that were all freelancers all of a sudden getting full-time jobs.
All of a sudden we got hired. Yeah.
So it was you and James Intercasso and Sean Merwin. And it was like, wow, what's going on here?
I think that's a good sign, right, for this industry. We are starting to actually, like, companies are starting to get in the black instead of in the red for the first time ever. And I love that people are prioritizing hiring full-time employees and really giving people benefits and like a chance to shine, because having come from I just did 1 full year of full-time freelance, and that was so much. It is just such a daily struggle to try and, work on as many projects as you can and try to organize your life and try to live on, the pennies that you get as a TTRPG designer. Making the jump to full-time has been extraordinary, and I'm very, very lucky to be here.
Yeah, I know we still have a long way to go before people are really getting paid what they're worth in the hobby and for different places. But it is nice to see more people than I can remember seeing be able to actually make a living at it.
I mean, a few years ago, I never would have been able to, I couldn't even have imagined having the job I have now, being a full-time game designer. And that is just extraordinary. That possibilities are opening up and people want them and there is need for them.
Well, thankfully, I mean, I'm very happy to see people working full time and to see the variety of products coming out that I review a lot of them, so I get to see a whole bunch of them, and I like seeing a wide range of things.
When you have a happy team, how much like good stuff you can make as a company. It's like, every time you turn around, MCDM Productions is making something amazing. It's because they pay people so well, and it's just such a great environment. It's just putting money right into quality.
And I also get a feeling like once you get to a certain point and where people kind of trust certain designers and certain companies, you actually start seeing a wider variety of things, because people know, you know what, I can push a little bit further and try this instead of just doing slightly different versions of the thing that already sold.
Yeah, exactly. You can take more creative license and creative risk. I think, when your company is starting to do well, or, you do have a string of products that have been going consistently well, you absolutely build that trust. Your reputation is everything in this company.
Well, I mean, I really loved 3.5, and I bought almost everything that came out for 3.5.
Oh yeah, I have 3 bookshelves full.
But there was definitely a feeling that you were selling to the same people over and over again.
Yep.
And that became a problem, because if you're selling to the same people over and over again, And if, for example, somebody doesn't like that brand new, twist that you put on something, then your product that you were counting on selling the same amount as the thing you put out last time, that suddenly becomes more of a problem than with this amazing explosion of 5th edition, popularity that people have been coming into the hobby.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be writing and to be designing games in general, because so many people are coming to gaming for the first time ever. Writing products that I think this is something that I like to think of as one of my specialties, because I've been playing D&D for a very long
Mm-hmm.
time and I'm very familiar with older editions, but I am in the younger age bracket. So I like to think of myself as somebody who's bridging the gap between like this historical fantasy and this awesome catalog of work and like a love for, the roots of everything, yet bringing it in a way that is approachable to these new audiences and like introducing them to all this awesome stuff that's been around and really defined the genre, but making it accessible, making it easy to understand, making it usable.
Yeah, this is going to date me, but I had taught my kids how to play D&D, and I used to run, games for them. They were part of one of the groups that I ran, and 2 of them are still playing D&D now that they're married and out on their own.
Yay!
And what's really funny is they're not just buying the Wizards material. Like, my son has backed several Kickstarters. Like, it's not just bringing people into the hobby, it's bringing people into the whole range of the hobby.
Oh
It's
yeah.
not just Wizards, it's the entire hobby, and that's what I really like about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much stuff out there, and it's just the more that like nerdery becomes acceptable in general, I think, all you when one thing rises, everything else is brought up with it, right? I think we're seeing a surge, in comics, in these like nerdy TV series, Oh my gosh, the fact that like Witcher is, like nationally popular, that's
Yes.
amazing when you look at that. And a lot of that is because of this, this impetus of gaming is just rising up everywhere. It's so incredible to see.
And the thing, and it's that this is the thing that gets me, is it's not just D&D. I'm seeing more licensed things that are much more viable than I would have thought they would have been, especially like 10 years ago. There's an Alien RPG that's doing really well. There's a Star Trek RPG. There's a Dune RPG. I mean, these properties that, if you would have told me 10 years ago there's going to be an RPG, I'd be like, oh yeah, and it's probably going to sell like 100 copies. That's cool.
Yeah, at a con, somebody is going to staple some paperback books together, and there you go. I mean, yeah, and especially with things like Kickstarter now, becoming an actual viable way to make your products, everyone can get into the creative space. What they do with that power once they're there still is yet to be determined, but people can, actually make their dreams happen for the first time ever.
Great power comes great responsibility.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So speaking of actually Wizards of the Coast, you worked on Icewind Dale Rime with Frost Maiden, and I have even listened to some of the episodes where you're running this for other people on your podcast. What was it like to work on that adventure?
Yeah, it's scary. I think, as you might imagine, being a fresh-faced designer and getting approached to write, especially with so many other wonderful folks on that project. I mean, like Ashley Warren and H.H. Carlin, like, were designers that I had been a huge fan of and followed their work for a long time. And then getting put on the project with them, I was like, are you sure? I remember getting the email from Chris Perkins saying, hey, would you be interested in writing for this book? And I was like, is this real? But it was good. It was challenging. It was absolutely the hardest thing I've ever done, and totally vital for me to learn about what this career demands, because it was very challenging. Also, having somebody at that level of, proficiency judging your work, and then having to deal with the feedback and like getting into that process, which is so fast and so, the forge has been made, and like this is how the books are made, and you got to run to keep up and get in there. So a big learning experience.
What I'm interested too is whenever I see multiple designers on a book like that, like for example on Candlekeep Mysteries, I understand how that worked because you had individuals working
Individual
on
pieces, yeah.
individual pieces. But how does the collaboration really work on a book like Rime of the Frost Maiden?
Yeah, so what I've heard, because I have talked to, other design teams from books, is that my experience was remarkably team forward and supportive compared to some of the other books that have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time it is just a bunch of disparate designers and you get your section of the book and you never talk about it and you send it in and that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But for Rime of the Frost Maiden, all of the designers on that book were so good about meeting up regularly and providing support, be it emotional or, or otherwise. But I was just truly blessed to have that group of people to be designing and learning alongside. I don't know if I could have gotten through it without such support and kindness.
So I am really interested to hear more of your game that you're running, though, just because there is something kind of neat about, okay, this is somebody whose fingerprints are all over this to begin with, and then they're running it the way they want to for this group.
Yeah, it is so weird, having this book that you're running from, this full campaign. And honestly, it makes DM prep so much easier because I'm so familiar with
All you have to do is just write a published book.
There you go, and then it's a breeze. But
Guide
it
to DM
is
prep right there.
my favorite part is because a lot of my stuff is woven into different parts of the book. Seeing when they encounter something that I wrote or I know that I like designed this thing, I feel almost like a spectator, behind the glass, like, are you gonna like it? Are you gonna hate it? It's very joyful. I will say the whole time. I feel like I feel like a guilty kid, honestly, every time I run this game.
It is interesting though, hearing you talk about the collaborative process, because the way the adventures have been developed has really changed since the launch of 5th edition, just from looking at it from the outside, because your first 3 major story arcs were actually outsourced from freelance development studios, and to see that kind of develop over time has been really interesting, especially as it's pulling in more people whose name I recognize, to work on different things too.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, I think it's clear Wizards still hasn't figured out what the best way to do adventures is yet, or books even. So it's something, as my job as a game designer working with third-party companies, it's really important for us to keep our finger on the pulse of like, what is Wizards doing? Like, what is the new strategy? Why is this changing? And then also trying to read those trends. And because, at the end of the day, we all want to develop something that is useful, that is helpful, that is the best tool we can possibly design. So every book, it's like, a different attempt at building a multi-tool. It's like if you had no idea what a multi-tool was and somebody explained it to you, each book is like the attempt to do it until we get it perfectly right.
Yeah, and that's been interesting just from the review front, because there has been that change in, anytime somebody's developing something and it's not for the primary company, there is kind of that deviation, that standard deviation from that.
Like,
but
here's how we do it.
Yeah, what is the core? And the core has been changing. Like, for example, with the ability score adjustments and not being connected to ancestry at this point in time, changing race into something like lineage or ancestry, trying to decouple things like cultural things from those things to where they're more actual specific traits, which is something that, if you look at the Unearthed Arcana for Dragonborn, it looks like a lot of that is less, this is Dragonborn society, and this is more, here's cool stuff that if you're, a dragon person, you could do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's interesting, and then just seeing like some of the changes in, like, instead of per ability score bonus going to per proficiency score bonus, and spending certain resources to reset things that are normally once per long rest. That is a lot of moving parts that have been kind of drifting here. And I don't get me wrong, I love a lot of that stuff. I like a lot of those changes. I think things like, going with per proficiency bonus.
Oh, it's so much better to design around proficiency bonus.
Yeah,
I have this argument frequently, but it's just so much better. It naturally scales. It makes sense.
yes, and you're not overly penalizing somebody that's not 100% optimized for their ability
Right.
bonuses. And if you have an ability that keys off of something
Hmm.
that isn't your primary thing, then at least you're,
You got something.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
going way off
exactly.
into the woods here. But yeah, this, but yeah, I mean, it is interesting to see like people trying to keep up with those trends and whether they're incorporating them. And I've even mentioned like in some of my reviews that certain things, and it's not like an indictment or anything, but there's certain things that feel like first generation 5e design because it hews very closely to what
Hmm.
things look like in the player's handbook versus more recent design that looks more like the type of things that you're seeing in current books.
Yeah, it is. I mean, this is one of the best things about having so many third-party companies out there and also having places like DM's Guild and where people can bring creativity and innovation to the design process. I think everybody else's creativity and innovation is forcing Wizards to step up and to
Hmm.
change and to develop new stuff. So it's ultimately feeding back into each other to make a better game,
Hmm.
which is, how the market should work. Lots of options, everybody gets better. So it's exciting. It's really exciting to be here and to watch that happening.
Yeah, it was interesting because I remember back when third edition was transitioning to fourth edition, one of the designers, and I couldn't remember who it was right now, but they were discussing how they were hoping that the open game license would create a whole bunch of new things and then they would be able to bring that back in
Hmm.
and kind of integrate that into the game and get some fresh air from that. And it didn't happen as much as they wanted it to with third
Yeah,
edition. And I feel like it is happening a lot more with
with
fifth
fifth
edition.
edition. Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, but who knows? Like, who knows what the next step is? Like, are we getting a 5.5? Like, it feels like at this point, like we're
It
pretty
does.
new for. Hmm.
Yeah, it is weird because like once you start looking at say like the Dragonborn, assuming that they kind of look like they do in Unearthed Arcana, when those come out in the Fizzband book, those when you start looking back at the player's handbook and what those lineages look like in there, it's like, hmm.
Hmm. I mean, that's something I've been saying. It's now we are sort of getting into a gray area where it's like, if somebody walks up to the game and they're like, "Oh, okay, I just bought the player's handbook. Like that's the book I need, that's the book I can afford." And
Hmm.
then, they show up to a public play space next to somebody who's, wielding one of these banana pants ancestries from the Curse of Strahd book or from Ravenloft. It's like, that's not fair. That is a financial based disparity that we are looking at
Yeah.
here. So it's and I'm not sure. I don't have the answers
Hmm.
to how we fix that, but I mean, hopefully, third party companies are there making things that are very accessible and
Hmm.
oftentimes more affordable. So maybe that's going to equal the playing field.
I know that one of the things that has been kind of talked about recently is changing some of the lore around the Drow. But that was
Mm.
something I was going to say when I think about third-party developers. I love what Kobold Press did with Drow and the Underworld Player's Guide
Hmm.
because they felt different and kind of alien to other elves, but they weren't cursed and always evil, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it avoided a lot of that stuff while still kind of making them okay, these underground elves are different.
This is a
And
different world.
yeah.
Yeah. As it would be if
Yeah.
you're living underground.
And actually I think some of that even reminds me of the game The Spire
Mhm.
and how it goes into the idea that all of these things with the drow being cursed and lesser versions of elves is kind of like propaganda from the
Mhm.
high
Mhm.
elves. And I loved that so much when I first
Yeah.
read that book. That idea that, maybe even if it's not 100% true, the idea that you don't know the whole story.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily understand this, even though we're looking at this from a top down there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting move, and I totally understand, where Wizards is coming from wanting to,
Hmm.
make all of this not canon anymore because these people who are walking up to the game for the first time
Yeah.
ever They don't care what all the Forgotten Realms lore is. Honestly, you can just ignore the fact that Forgotten Realms is a setting and be fine. You can still play D&D. I think that's how most people walking up to it play D&D. So,
What's really weird is I have been like a longtime Realms fan,
mhm.
but even I have not been that shocked or upset by decoupling things from
Yeah.
canon, because at some point it does become too unwieldy, and
Mhm.
also there are some negative things attached to that canon that
Yeah.
it would just be better to cut loose than to try and fix.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's been something like I love all the giant lore that came up in Storm King's Thunder. I
Mhm.
love all the Netherese stuff that came up in Rime of the Frost Maiden. But you can still do that without saying
Without knowing
100%
what
of
the heck
every
that is.
word
Yeah.
has always been true.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely is, and it does the DMs who go real hard on the Forgotten Realms stuff and their players maybe don't know what's going on. It has been historically used as a tool to kind of lord
Hmm.
over these players. It's like, "Oh, you don't belong here." So, I see where they're coming from. And honestly, I think if they want to make this more of a, a painter's tool set than saying like, "Hey, this is the canvas you have to paint on.
Hmm.
Let's just give you the paint." I think that's probably a pretty smart move.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. And honestly, even though Greyhawk was kind of the base for third edition, it felt like it was less dependent on having a default setting,
Yeah, definitely.
when that came out.
Yeah. I mean, I love all the Greyhawk gods. Those are my favorite deities to date. I still weave them into everything, but it was a lot looser, it felt
Hmm.
like.
I have a soft spot for the Dawn War Pantheon that came out from fourth edition.
Ooh,
I was
cool.
really kind of glad that they left those
Mhm.
in the DMG.
Yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
that's a
honestly,
good
I
baseline.
I have all the 4th edition books. I ran it for a very brief amount of time before returning back to 3.5. But I mean, the 4E books are beautiful and
Hmm.
full of such good ideas. Frequently, if I'm ever like blocked on something, I love flipping through 4th edition books, 3.5 books.
Oh, especially the DMGs.
Oh yeah. Oh, the DMGs for 4E. The DMG for 4E was great. We we just need someone to like copy paste a bunch of that stuff and give us something. 5th edition.
Like,
Help
I'm
us
okay with
out.
the DMG too. I would buy it.
Help us
That.
out. Yeah, let's just do it.
Are there any future projects that you have coming up that you'd like to talk about at this time?
Ooh, future projects. I mean,
Future projects that you can talk about that you would like to
yes,
talk
right.
about.
I mean, the Venture Maidens campaign guide obviously is in full production, and the writing for that is going to be finished in September. So that's like right around the corner. So the exciting stuff is going to be coming out there. So definitely keep your eyes on that project. Also, I keep your eye on Kobold Press. I write a lot of stuff for them, and there's some exciting stuff coming down the pipelines there.
So are you saying that you might have a hand in this character option thing that I've
I
seen?
I don't know. Perhaps. And if you haven't checked it out yet, Kingdoms and Warfare from MCDM Productions just became available for purchase as digital versions.
Hmm.
I would love if you checked out my stuff in there. I think that was probably some of the best writing and design I've ever done was for that book. So I'm really, really proud of it.
Hmm.
But other than that, I check out Venture Maidens campaign too. I don't think I can tell you about any of my other projects, but just keep an eye out.
Did you have a specific focus in Kingdoms and Warfare?
Yeah, so well, I did the Undying Court. So all 7 of those
Oh.
very nasty undead boys. I got to do all of them. So, check that out if you want some nasty undead baddies. Oh boy. I also did a bunch of items for that, and you can see, I did some of the factions, some of the things. So that's the big section. But I had hands and everything else in that book as well. But
Okay.
yeah. Oh man, it was so fun. I got to see, the little minis. Like on the Kickstarter, they had
Uh-huh.
the Undying Court minis before like the stat blocks were designed, right? So I got to look at these sick, nasty little minis and like build stat blocks, which was so much fun.
So I I have bent your ear for quite a bit here, and I love a wide range of RPGs, but honestly, if you get me talking about D&D, I can go off on lots of tangents, and
Oh yeah.
I have really enjoyed talking to you because you are just like, you're all over what I picture in, like, there are certain names that I associate with different editions, and yours is definitely becoming one of the names that I associate with 5th edition with everything
Yeah.
that I've seen.
Oh gosh, thank you. That's very flattering. Thank you so much.
So, where can people find you and keep up with the things that you're working on?
Yeah, the very, very best way to keep up with the latest updates is to follow me on Twitter at @CConowitch. And then if you want to see a slightly behind catalog of everything I've worked on, you can head to my website, celesteconowitch.com. Definitely check out also Penwitch Studio. I'm not sure when this episode is dropping, but August 14th and 15th, we're running an event called Podjam. It's a big charity event that's happening where all proceeds are going to the Trevor Project, which is a very awesome LGBTQ mental health organization.
I think I just saw Lisa post about that not
Yeah,
too long before.
so that's today we announced it. So that's going to be the 14th and 15th. We're going to have a ton of podcasters from a bunch of nerdy themed shows on, having panels about like how to make a podcast, how to make money on a podcast, where to even get started. We'll have live recordings. It'll be a ton of fun. So we'd love to see you there on the Venture Maidens Twitch channel. You can check that out.
That is awesome. So, thank you so much for being here on the Gnomecast. Do you have any final thoughts you want to throw out to the audience?
No, just, stick with it. Be friendly, be kind, love games. Dragons rock. Boom. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
You are welcome. We really appreciate your time, and we'll be looking forward to seeing more of your projects in the future. This show is funded by the Gnome Stew Patreon. You too can become a Patreon backer by following the Patreon link on the Gnome Stew website to the Gnome Stew Patreon. This ad brought to you by the world's most popular role-playing game. No, not that one. We're taking advertising from the multiverse, so we're sponsored by the world's most popular role-playing game from an Earth where dinosaurs became the dominant life form. Pick up your copy of Egg Stealers and Lava Tunnels 5th edition today. If you're enjoying the Gnomecast, you'll probably like many of the other Misdirected Mark shows. Here's one to check out. Mastering Dungeons. RPG veterans and game designers Teos Abadia and Sean Merwin look at the game and the hobby of D&D from a variety of viewpoints, reporting the news, understanding the business, reviewing the products, and illuminating the design. Whether you're a fan, a player, a DM, or a designer, Sean and Teos cover topics of interest to you.
Gnomecast is hosted by Misdirected Mark Productions, the media arm of Encoded Designs.